My name is Rachel Elizabeth Morrison. I'm 45 years old, and I'm a civil rights attorney who has spent the last 20 years defending religious freedom in federal courts across America. I've fought for Christians' rights to pray in schools, display nativity scenes, and run their businesses according to biblical principles. I thought I understood the battle for religious liberty in our country, until the day I died for 22 minutes and Jesus revealed to me a coordinated plan to eliminate religious freedom that will shock you to your core. It was November 3rd, 2024, Election Day. I was driving home from a polling station in Richmond, Virginia, where I had just voted and spent the day as a poll watcher, ensuring that Christian voters weren't being intimidated or suppressed. The irony of what happened next still gives me chills. For 2 decades, I dedicated my life to protecting the First Amendment. I'd won cases against school districts that banned Christmas carols, defended pastors who were arrested for preaching biblical truth, and fought corporations that fired employees for their Christian beliefs. But what I didn't realize was that every case I won, every victory for religious freedom, was just a small battle in a much larger war, a spiritual war that was being fought on levels I never imagined. That evening, I was reviewing notes from Election Day violations I'd witnessed, polling places that had intimidated Christian voters, districts where religious extremist was being used to describe anyone who voted based on biblical values. I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of dread, not just about the election results, but about the future of faith in America. I was stopped at a red light, praying for our nation, when a drunk driver ran the red light at 65 miles per hour and hit my car head-on. The impact was so severe that my heart stopped instantly. But what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the fight for religious freedom in America. The paramedics later told me that I was clinically dead for 22 minutes. They said it was the longest successful resuscitation they'd ever seen. But during those 22 minutes, I wasn't dead, I was more alive than I'd ever been in my life. Suddenly, I was floating above the accident scene, watching EMTs frantically working on my body. I could see my husband Michael rushing to the hospital, our children Sarah and David being brought by my sister. But strangely, I felt complete peace, even seeing my broken body below. Then I felt this gentle pulling sensation, like I was being drawn upward through a tunnel of pure light. But this wasn't just light. It was alive, warm, and filled with indescribable love. As I moved through this tunnel, I felt every burden I'd been carrying as a religious freedom attorney just melting away. When I emerged, I found myself in the most beautiful place I could never have imagined. It looked like a vast library mixed with a courtroom, but everything was made of light and love. And there, standing before what appeared to be the ultimate bench of justice, was Jesus Christ. He wasn't like any painting or movie portrayal I'd ever seen. Pure authority and love radiated from him. His eyes held both infinite compassion and perfect justice, the kind of justice I'd been fighting for in earthly courts, but had never truly seen. "Rachel," he said, and his voice was like the sound of perfect justice itself. "I brought you here because you need to see what's really happening to religious freedom in America." I wanted to worship, to fall at his feet, but he gestured for me to walk with him. As we moved through this heavenly realm, I noticed we were approaching what looked like a massive war room, with screens covering every wall. "What you've been fighting in courtrooms is just the surface," Jesus explained. "I want to show you the real battle for religious freedom, the one being fought in the spiritual realm that determines the outcomes in your physical courts." As we entered this war room, I was shocked to see thousands of screens showing churches, Christian schools, faith-based businesses, and believers across America. But what horrified me was seeing dark spiritual entities hovering over many of these places, and a coordinated attack plan being executed with military precision. "Rachel," Jesus said, pointing to the screens, "what I'm about to show you is a systematic plan to eliminate religious freedom in America. It's been in development for decades, but it's now entering its final phase." I watched in horror as these screens revealed a multi-layered strategy to destroy religious liberty that was far more sophisticated than anything I'd encountered in my legal career. The first screen showed what Jesus called legal incrementalism. I saw how anti-religious freedom forces were deliberately bringing cases to court that seemed minor but established precedents for larger restrictions. Each small victory was a building block toward complete religious suppression. I witnessed cases where Christian bakers were being sued not just to change their business practices, but to establish legal precedent that religious beliefs must bow to sexual orientation laws. I saw how school prayer cases were being used to gradually expand the definition of separation of church and state far beyond what the founders intended. Each case that restricts religious freedom, Jesus explained, creates legal precedent for the next more restrictive case. They're building a legal framework to eventually criminalize biblical Christianity. The second screen revealed cultural conditioning. I watched as entertainment, education, and media were being systematically used to portray religious people as hateful, intolerant, and dangerous to society. I saw how movies and TV shows consistently portrayed Christians as villains or hypocrites. I witnessed how public schools were teaching children that religious beliefs were personal opinions that had no place in public life. I observed how news media was framing religious freedom cases as discrimination rather than constitutional rights. They're conditioning an entire generation to view religious freedom as religious oppression, Jesus said sadly. When the time comes for full restrictions, the public will actually support them. The third screen showed economic warfare. I was shocked to see how corporations were being systematically pressured to exclude religious viewpoints from their platforms, services, and employment. I watched Christian authors being removed from publishing platforms, faith-based businesses being denied banking services, and religious organizations losing their tax-exempt status for maintaining biblical beliefs about marriage and sexuality. They're creating an economic environment where practicing your faith becomes financially impossible, Jesus revealed. If you can't work, publish, bank, or do business because of your beliefs, you've been effectively silenced without any law being passed. The fourth screen revealed technological suppression. I saw how social media algorithms were being programmed to suppress religious content, how search engines were burying Christian websites, and how AI systems were being trained to flag biblical content as hate speech. The digital public square is being systematically cleansed of religious voices, Jesus explained. Soon sharing your faith online will be impossible through mainstream channels. But what terrified me most was the fifth screen, showing legislative endgame. I witnessed future legislation that would criminalize religious hate speech, mandate that all religious organizations perform same-sex marriages or lose legal status, and require religious schools to teach curricula that directly contradicted their beliefs. I saw bills being drafted that would remove children from homes where parents taught traditional biblical values, laws that would criminalize pastoral counseling for unwanted sexual attractions, and regulations that would force Christian medical professionals to perform procedures that violated their conscience. Rachel, Jesus said gravely, this isn't conspiracy theory. These plans are already being implemented. The window to stop them through legal means is closing rapidly. Then Jesus showed me the spiritual forces behind this plan. I saw massive demonic principalities coordinating these attacks from the spiritual realm. These weren't random cultural shifts, they were coordinated assaults on religious freedom directed by spiritual powers that understood that destroying religious liberty was the key to establishing their kingdom on earth. The enemy knows that religious freedom is the foundation of all other freedoms, Jesus revealed. If he can eliminate your right to worship, speak, and live according to your faith, he can control everything else. But Jesus, I asked, how did this happen? How did we get to this point? His expression became deeply sad. Let me show you how religious freedom is lost. Not through sudden persecution, but through gradual compromise and spiritual sleepiness among my people. Suddenly, I was witnessing decades of American Christian history from a spiritual perspective. I saw how gradually, systematically, Christians had been retreating from public life instead of engaging the culture with truth and love. I watched as believers abandoned education, entertainment, journalism, and politics to non-believers, thinking they were being spiritual by avoiding worldly involvement. With each retreat, the spiritual strongholds over these areas grew stronger. When my people withdraw from culture, Jesus explained, they create a spiritual vacuum that the enemy is eager to fill. Religious freedom isn't lost through persecution alone. It's lost through abdication. Jesus showed me how many Christians had been deceived into believing that suffering persecution was somehow more spiritual than preventing it. I saw believers who actually welcomed restrictions on their faith, thinking it made them more like the early church. I never called my people to seek persecution. Jesus said firmly, I called them to be salt and light, preserving and illuminating their culture. When salt loses its saltiness, decay is inevitable. Then Jesus revealed the spiritual dynamics that determine the outcomes of religious freedom cases. I watched court cases where the spiritual atmosphere over the courtroom determined the verdict more than the legal arguments presented. Where Christians were praying and fasting before and during trials, spiritual light filled the courtrooms and righteous decisions were made. But where believers were passive, assuming God's will would automatically prevail, spiritual darkness influenced judges and juries toward anti-religious decisions. Religious freedom battles are won or lost in prayer before they're ever argued in court. Jesus revealed, too many of my people think legal expertise alone will preserve their freedoms. Jesus then showed me something that gave me hope, a remnant of believers who understood that religious freedom was worth fighting for both legally and spiritually. These Christians were engaged in serious spiritual warfare, strategic legal action, and cultural engagement. I watched as their prayers literally broke spiritual strongholds over courts, their legal work established righteous precedents, and their cultural involvement began shifting public opinion back toward respecting religious liberty. This remnant understands that religious freedom is not just about their right to worship. Jesus explained, they recognize that it's about preserving the foundation that allows truth to flourish in society. But Jesus also revealed that time was running out. The coordinated attack on religious freedom was accelerating, and the window for preserving liberty through normal legal and political means was closing rapidly. The final phase of their plan is beginning. Jesus warned, if my people don't engage in this battle immediately, and with everything they have, the next generation of American Christians will worship in secret or not at all. But Jesus, I pleaded, what can we do? This plan seems so coordinated, so powerful. How can ordinary Christians fight back? His eyes filled with both determination and hope. Rachel, I'm going to show you weapons that can not only stop this plan, but reverse it completely. As our time together was ending, Jesus' expression became more urgent than anything I'd seen. Rachel, what I'm about to show you is why this message cannot wait even one more day. Suddenly, I was seeing into the immediate future of religious freedom in America, and what I witnessed made my spirit cry out in anguish. I saw legislation being passed that criminalized biblical preaching as hate speech. I witnessed Christian schools being forced to close for refusing to teach curriculum that contradicted Scripture. I observed pastors being arrested for counseling according to biblical principles. These aren't distant possibilities, Jesus warned. The final phase of this plan is beginning right now. The window to stop it is measured in months, not years. I watched a timeline where religious freedom in America could be completely eliminated within a single presidential term if Christians didn't immediately engage in serious spiritual and legal warfare. The enemy has been building this plan for decades, Jesus explained. Now he's accelerating the timeline because he knows his time is short. Then Jesus showed me something that broke my heart. I saw millions of American Christians who remained completely unaware of this coordinated attack. They were focused on comfort, entertainment, and personal prosperity, while their religious freedom was being systematically dismantled. Many of my people are like the frog in slowly boiling water, Jesus said sadly. They don't realize how close they are to losing everything until it's too late. But then he showed me the believers who were awake, alert, and fighting this battle. These Christians were experiencing supernatural protection and seeing remarkable victories in court cases and legislation because they understood the spiritual nature of the war they were in. Those who fight for religious freedom with spiritual weapons will see breakthrough, Jesus promised. But those who remain passive will watch their children grow up in a nation where practicing biblical faith is illegal. Jesus placed his hands on my shoulders. Tell them, Rachel. Tell American Christians that their religious freedom is under coordinated attack and that they have both the authority and the weapons to stop it. But tell them that time is almost gone. I felt overwhelmed by the weight of this responsibility. Jesus, will they listen? Will they believe what I've seen? Some will, he said gently. And those who do will help preserve religious freedom for the next generation. That's worth every effort to share this message. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back through that tunnel of light. As much as I wanted to stay in that place of perfect justice, I knew I had a critical mission to complete. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air in a trauma bay, surrounded by medical staff who looked absolutely stunned. My husband Michael was weeping with relief, and my children Sarah and David were crying tears of joy. The medical team couldn't explain what had happened. After 22 minutes without a heartbeat, I should have had severe brain damage. Instead, every neurological test came back completely normal. The trauma surgeon called it medically impossible, but I knew exactly what had happened. Jesus had brought me back because American Christians needed to understand the true nature of the battle for religious freedom. The first thing I did when I was stable enough was gather my family and closest Christian friends. I told them everything Jesus had shown me. We immediately began implementing the prayer strategies he had revealed. Within weeks, we started seeing breakthrough. A case I'd been working on for 3 years suddenly got a favorable ruling. A school district that had banned Christian clubs reversed their decision. A pastor who was facing charges for preaching biblical truth had all charges dropped. But more importantly, I knew I had to share this urgent message with Christians across America. The response has been incredible. Thousands of believers have joined coordinated prayer efforts targeting religious freedom cases. Churches are organizing fasting campaigns for specific legislation. Christian attorneys are networking with prayer warriors for strategic spiritual warfare. And we're seeing breakthrough after breakthrough as God's people engage in this battle with both spiritual and legal weapons. That was 8 months ago, and my entire approach to defending religious freedom has been transformed. I'm still a civil rights attorney, but now I understand that my real work is spiritual warfare combined with legal expertise. Michael and I have learned to fast and pray before every court hearing. We've connected with a network of intercessors who pray specifically during trials. We've seen case after case decided in favor of religious liberty because we're fighting with both natural and supernatural weapons. My children, Sarah and David, now understand that their future freedom to practice their faith depends on the spiritual battle being fought right now. They've learned to pray for specific judges and legislation by name. But here's what grieves my heart. I've shared this revelation with hundreds of Christians, and while some have responded with serious prayer and action, others dismiss it as too dramatic or assume someone else will fight for their freedoms. If you're watching this video, it's not by accident. Jesus is trying to wake up his people to the coordinated attack on religious freedom happening right now. Your right to worship, to raise your children according to biblical values, to run your business according to your conscience. All of this is under systematic assault. But you don't have to be a passive victim. Here's what I want you to do immediately. First, repent for any spiritual compromise that may have weakened your authority to fight for religious freedom. Second, begin praying daily for specific religious freedom cases currently in the courts. I'll provide a list of current cases that need prayer coverage. Third, start fasting regularly for judges, legislators, and attorneys involved in religious liberty battles. Fourth, get involved in local politics where many religious freedom battles are won or lost. Fifth, support Christian legal organizations financially and through prayer. Sixth, educate other believers about the coordinated nature of attacks on religious freedom. Seventh, connect with other Christians who understand this spiritual battle and are committed to fighting it. American Christians are at a crossroads. We can continue sleeping while our religious freedom is systematically dismantled, or we can wake up and fight with the spiritual weapons Jesus has given us. The choice is ours, but we must choose immediately. As Jesus showed me, the final phase of the plan to eliminate religious freedom has already begun. My name is Rachel Elizabeth Morrison. I died for 22 minutes, and Jesus sent me back to warn American Christians that their religious freedom is under coordinated attack, but also to show them how to preserve it. The question is, will you join the fight for religious freedom before it's too late?